Good afternoon, everyone. May I have your attention, please? At this time, I have to ask everyone who's holding seats to please release it. The faster we sit down, the faster we can start. So everyone who have a bag, a jacket, a book on a seat, can you please release the seat so people can sit so we can start?
Are we ready? Welcome, everyone. I'm honored to be speaking to a sold-out house here in the Riverside Church. An historic New York institution where tonight we are celebrating the launch of a very important new book, Bernie Sanders' Guide to Political Revolution. My name is Rick MacArthur, and I'm the publisher of Harper's Magazine. Which is the main sponsor of this event, and most decidedly not a part of the corporate media that Senator Sanders so forcefully denounces. I met Bernie Sanders for the first time about 15 minutes ago. We haven't published him in the magazine, not yet. But I feel, nevertheless, that there was something inevitable about this evening and the linking of Harper's with his political and educational crusade. Let me quickly explain why by quoting from Senator Sanders' book. One of the most profound lessons that I've learned in politics is that everything is related to everything else, he writes. Nothing exists in a vacuum. Coming into the church tonight, some of you received copies of the November 2016 issue of Harper's Magazine. And, as you can see right here, The cover article is about the big media and its dislike for independent politicians like Bernie Sanders. We illustrated the piece with a rolled-up copy of the Washington Post, brandished menacingly, that looks very much like it's about to descend on Senator Sanders in an effort to squash him. The Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos, the founder and chairman of Amazon, the mega company that is currently swallowing up businesses everywhere, while it preys on a beleaguered and increasingly desperate American workforce. It is not a coincidence that Jeff Bezos got his start by competing with independent bookstores. He's put many hundreds out of business with a discounting practice known as predatory pricing. And now he's moved on to intimidating book publishers, authors, and big chain bookstores. It is also not a coincidence that the second sponsor of tonight's event is an independent bookstore called Book Culture. Located on Columbus Avenue between 81st and 82nd Streets, of which I am the proud part owner. Jeff Bezos would like to squash book culture and its independent spirit, just as he would like to squash Bernie Sanders and his independent spirit. Well, guess what? Our pushback locally on Columbus Avenue, like Bernie Sanders' his pushback nationally against the corporate political system, has been remarkably successful. We haven't won yet. We need your support, but we're winning. And the counterattack against Amazon continues right here and right now. I'm not going to make a formal introduction of Bernie Sanders. You all know him. But there's one biographical detail you might not know about the senator that I want to emphasize. How many students are here tonight? Raise your hands. Okay. This book is aimed at you, although it's also a very good, succinct read for older adults. As the father of two students who are in the audience, my daughters Sophie and Emmy, I recommend it wholeheartedly to every parent, not only as a guide to political reform, but also as a guide to civic life. Senator Sanders is a graduate of James Madison High School in Brooklyn. Which is named for the principal architect of our imperfect but brilliantly constructed U.S. Constitution. In his autobiography published last year, Senator Sanders doesn't wax sentimental about high school or his early education. Indeed, it sounds like running track at Madison was as important to him as anything else he did. But something you should know is that every day Bernie Sanders entered his high school building, he passed under an inscription by James Madison that goes like this: "Education is the true foundation of civil liberty." Please take that to heart and cherish and nurture your education. Understand that education, using Bernie Sanders' book and every other means at your disposal, is the best path not only to true citizenship, but also to personal freedom and integrity of thought. The man I'm about to present is one of the finest products I know of Madison's dictum. He took it to heart, and he never stops learning. Whether he should already be the President of the United States, or whether he becomes the next President of the United States, Bernie Sanders personifies the best of this country's founding ideals of equality, justice, freedom, and the pursuit of happiness. Please welcome the pride of Brooklyn and of the other 4 boroughs as well, Senator Bernie Sanders.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So let me begin by reminding everybody here today, and what a fantastic turnout this is, just to remind all of you that the political revolution is not Bernie, it is you, each and every one of you. And let me thank Rick MacArthur for that very kind introduction. And before I get into my remarks, let me express, and I know I do it for all of you and for everybody in the country, my condolences to the families who have lost loved ones in Houston and in the Texas area. We had a flood, terrible flooding in Vermont a number of years ago, and I visited families who had lost their homes. It is a very unpleasant, painful situation. If there is any silver lining, however, in what is going on in Texas today in terms of that devastation, it must be the profound reminder that we are one nation, and that the American people and Congress will not turn our backs on the suffering and destruction now taking place in Texas. At a time when there are those who want to divide our country up based on race, based on religion, based on sexual orientation, based on country of origin, at a time when there are those who hold and are pushing the ideology that says that every person in this country is in it for himself or herself, that the role of the government must not be to protect those who are in need. I am confident that the nation will come together to protect the people of Houston and of Texas. But it is not just the people of Texas today who need to be protected. Right now, our hearts go out to immigrant families in this country who are scared to death. To the young people on the DACA program, for whom the United States is their home and there is no place else to go. To the African American community, which recoils in horror seeing Ku Klux Klan people and neo-Nazis march on the streets of America. To the gay community, and to all of us who respond with unbelief, disbelief, at a president who wants to deny transgender people the right to serve in the military. To women who are fighting every day to retain the right to control their own bodies. So tonight we stand with the people. We stand in solidarity with the people in Texas, and we stand in solidarity with all those people who are undergoing oppression and suffering tonight. I feel a little bit humbled standing here in the beautiful Riverside Church. It's the first time I've been in this church. And I am reminded, as many of you know, that 50 years ago, a few months ago, 50 years ago, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered a courageous and powerful speech right here regarding the Vietnam War. It was, in fact, one of the important speeches in modern American history. It was a speech which spoke truth to power. It was a speech which ruptured Dr. King's relationship to the political establishment of the time and to President Lyndon Johnson. It was a speech which got him condemned in 168 newspapers throughout the country. And what those newspapers were saying is, who do you think you are? You're supposed to be a civil rights leader. You're supposed to fight segregation and racism. Who gave you the right to speak out on issues of war and peace and morality and national priorities? But King, being the incredibly courageous person that he was, understood that he could not speak about nonviolence in this country without condemning the extraordinary violence that was then taking place in Vietnam. And that was a speech which played a significant role in rallying the American people to end that tragic war and to help us understand the lesson we still must understand, and that is the tragic cost of war, not only in dollars, but to the men and women who are forced to fight those wars. Now, this book is entitled A Guide to Political Revolution. Why did I write the book? And the answer, good question, I don't know. But the answer, I think, can be found in the preface to the book. And this is what it says, and I write it speaking to the younger generation, but older people can read it too. And this is what I write to the younger generation, something that I believe passionately, based on traveling virtually to every state in this country and meeting with God knows how many thousands of people. This is what I write to the younger people. Quote, "You, the younger generation, are in many ways the most progressive generation in the history of our country. You have opposed racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, and oligarchy. You understand that greed and the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality that we experience is not what the United States is supposed to be about. You know that climate change is real and that we have a moral responsibility to take on the fossil fuel industry and transform our energy system away from fossil fuel and into energy efficiency and sustainable energy." And then I continue in the preface by saying what this book is about, and why I'm here tonight, is about converting that idealism and generosity of spirit into political activity. And when you do that, I have no doubt but that you and others like you will create a lot better world than the one my generation left you. End of quote. In other words, what this book is about is the need for a political revolution in this country. What it's about is the need to transform. It's not just about winning elections. You need to win elections. But what is more important is the need to transform this country economically, politically, and socially. And the energy and idealism of young people will play, and is playing today, an integral role in making that revolution. Now, in my view, the hardest part of politics, and something that Dr. King certainly knew, has to do with courage, has to do with imagination, has to do with the need to think big and not small. It has to do with the need to escape the limitations and constraints of the status quo, which means that you can turn on the TV and watch it hour after hour after hour, channel after channel and channel, and not see one relevant piece of information. And you have to understand that. It has to do with the need to reject as normal what we see every day around us. It has to do with the need to maintain a deep sense of outrage at what we see around us in this country and in the world. It has to do with the need to understand that the emperor, in fact, has no clothes, and the need to have the courage, and it takes courage, to ask the questions and provide the analyses that are not often done by mainstream media or by most politicians. I have always believed that it is much more important to ask the right questions than to have the right answers. It is more important to provoke debate on issues that, for a variety of reasons, are often swept under the rug, rather than to provide answers to questions which may not be, in the great scheme of things, all that important. And let me just throw out right now a few questions which we don't discuss very much. And that has to do with our views about the status quo. It has to do with a lot more than Donald Trump and his temperament, his incompetence, and his racism. The issues are much deeper than Trump. And the question is, where are we today as a nation? And more importantly, where do we want to go? Because we cannot make good decisions today unless we know where we want to be tomorrow. And let me throw out one issue which I talk about often, and I'm glad to see there has been in recent years more discussion, but not enough discussion. And that has to do with the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality in this country and around the world. This is not only an economic issue, as important as that is, it is even more profoundly a moral issue. And it is an issue that we cannot and must not shy away from. Let me give you an example, just an example. Today, the six wealthiest people on this planet own more wealth than the bottom half of the world's population, 3.7 billion people. 6 people, 3.7 billion people. This is the year 2017. Is it really appropriate? Is it really okay for so few to have so much while so many have so little? And this is one of the issues we just accept and we take for granted. But there are billionaires out there who compete with each other to see how big their yachts are, to see how many mansions they have, how many private jets they have, how many fancy automobiles they own. And meanwhile, while these billionaires boast of their wealth and their greed, hundreds of millions of people around this planet, including many, many children, suffer from malnutrition and die of easily treated diseases, while tens of millions more live in incredible squalor, without clean drinking water, without safe housing, without decent schools. The United Nations estimates that it would take no more than $30 billion a year to end hunger and malnutrition globally, and that is precisely what we as moral people should be doing. $30 billion a year to end hunger and malnutrition. Trump wants $80 billion more in the next 2 years for the military. Republicans want trillions over the next 10 years in tax breaks for the top 1%. As a people, we have got to lead the world and stand up for humanity and demand an end to hunger and malnutrition all over this planet. And when we do that, and when we reach out to the poor and the hungry all over this world, we become more human. We become better people. But needless to say, income and wealth inequality is not just a global issue, it is most certainly an American issue. And again, here is a point that we discuss much, much too little. And that is, over the last 4 decades, we have seen a massive redistribution of wealth in this country. Massive redistribution of wealth. Unfortunately, that redistribution has gone in the wrong direction. Over the last 40 years, the middle class of this country, once the envy of the entire world, people look to America and say, look at that middle class. That middle class, for the last 40 years, has been shrinking, and there has been a massive shift in wealth from working families to the top 1/10 of 1%. I'm not even talking about the top 1%, top 1/10 of 1%. 38 years ago, the top 1/10 of 1% owned about 7% of the nation's wealth. That's a lot. 1/10 of 1%, 7% of the nation's wealth. Today, that same 1/10 of 1% owns 22% of the nation's wealth. In fact, the top 1/10 of 1% now owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90% of the American people. We need to stand up and be as clear as we can be in stating that that is not what this country is supposed to be about. Today in America, you don't hear this on TV, you don't see it in the papers very often. There's a reason for that as well. The top 20 wealthiest people in this country now own as much wealth as the bottom half of America. One family, the Walton family of Walmarts, now owns more wealth than the bottom 42% of the American people. One family owns more wealth than the bottom 42%. And in the last 17 years, while we see people sleeping out on the street, children going hungry, we have seen a tenfold increase in the number of billionaires in this country, from 51 to 565. Huge increase in the number of billionaires, while 43 million Americans live in poverty and veterans sleep out on the streets. We have got to raise that issue, not give it up for 1 second, and tell the world and the leadership of this country that that is going to change. The billionaire class will not get it all. And I am asked every other day, I go on a radio show or whatever, and somebody says, Senator, how come Trump won? How did it happen? And I will tell you the reason why. It is a mistake, a serious mistake in my view, to believe that all of Trump's supporters are racist or sexist or homophobes. If you think that, you're missing the major point. As I have said many times, and I repeat today, not everybody, especially my colleagues in Washington, are happy to hear this, it wasn't that Trump won the election, it was that the Democratic Party lost the election. What do I mean by that? What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is if you go around the country, what you see is people in state after state living in despair, living in pain. I ran for president, I was in 46 states in this country, talked to thousands of people, and the images come back to me. Can't forget him. Woman in Las Vegas, Nevada, comes up to me. She was volunteering for the campaign, tears rolling down her cheeks. She says, Bernie, I have a daughter, 10 years of age. I'm making $10.40 an hour. I don't know how I will be able to take care of my daughter. All over this country, there are people now working at $8, $9, $10, $11 an hour. And you can do the arithmetic as well as I can. Nobody makes it on $10, $11 an hour. And Trump in his campaign stands up and he says, I see that pain. I hear your pain. I'm going to take on the establishment. Well, as we all know, Trump is a pathological liar. He lied then and he lies today. But he responded to something that in fact is very real. To people who today are working longer hours for lower wages. The real median income of full-time male workers today is $2,100 less in real inflation accounted for dollars than it was 43 years ago. Got that? The median male worker today in real dollars is making over $2,000 less than he did 43 years ago. And those people are angry, and they should be angry, because the system has failed them. Over the past decade, a staggering 81% of American households saw flat or falling incomes. So what the campaign becomes is people all over this country and in my state and here in New York working 2 or 3 jobs. Mom is out working, dad is working, the children are working, yet 52% of all new income is going to the top 1%. And people are asking, why? Why do I have to work 50 or 60 hours a week? Why can't I find in New York or Vermont affordable child care so that when I go to work, I know that my kid is in good hands? Can't find that. Why is it that if I'm 60 years of age, I may be one of the 50% of older workers in America who has nothing in the bank as they approach retirement? Or maybe I am retired, and maybe I'm on Social Security, and I'm trying to get by on $12,000, $13,000, $14,000 a year. Or maybe I'm a kid whose heart was set on going to college, but finds out that she can't afford to go to college because it's too expensive. Or maybe there's another young person who does graduate college, and they find themselves $50,000 in debt, or if they go to graduate school, maybe a few $100,000 in debt, earning $15 an hour. Or maybe that's one of the 28 million people who have no health insurance in America today. Or maybe the even greater number of people who do have health insurance but have high deductibles and high co-payments and can't afford to go to the doctor when they need to. For many, many years, Democrats have turned their back on that pain and on that reality. And it is high time that the Democratic Party, if it wants to regain power in the White House, in the Senate, in the House, and in governor's chairs all over this country, remembers the old Woody Allen song, "Which side are you on?" And the Democratic Party must be on the side of the working families of this country. But the issue that we are dealing with, and which this book touches on, is not just economics. It is not just the collapsing middle class. It is not just 43 million people living in poverty. It is not just the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality. That is bad unto itself. But all of that translates itself into the creation of a corrupt political system in which billionaires today are undermining American democracy and are buying elections because of their wealth. So on one hand, we have an economic struggle. How do we create an economy that works for all people and not just the people on top? And that is a monumental struggle. And on the other hand, we have a political struggle. How do we create a vibrant democracy in which you get a vote and you get a vote and we all get one vote and not have billionaires buy elections? Now, in terms of economics, the economics becomes political because progressives are not going to get elected unless they talk about the issues and fight the issues that working class families want to hear. What does that mean? Just give you a few examples. We must be loud and clear in stating that in America, whether you're in California, whether you're in New York or Mississippi or Alabama, if you work 40 hours a week, you must not be living in poverty. Is that a radical idea? I don't think so. I think that the minimum wage, which today is $7.25, is a starvation wage, must be raised to a living wage, $15 an hour. And let me tell you how political change takes place and how fast it sometimes can occur. If I was here 5 years ago and I said I was going to introduce, as I have, a minimum wage legislation calling for a $15 an hour, people would have said, well, Bernie, you know, that's a great idea, but you know what? Minimum wage is $7.25. You're crazy if you think we're going to double the minimum wage. It just can't happen. But the way change takes place now and has always taken place, it's not when the people on top decide to make things happen. It's when the grassroots begins to move and demands that change. So a number of years ago, a group called Fight for 15, group called Good Jobs Nation, and I've been proud to work with them over the years, they stood up and they said, you know what, you do the arithmetic. People need at least $15 an hour to have a minimal standard of living, afford an apartment someplace, take care of their children, at least $15 an hour. And more people heard them. The fast food workers in McDonald's and in Wendy's, Burger King, they went out on strike, they went to the streets, they talked to people in their communities. I was at a rally in Washington, D.C. a couple of years ago. A guy was working for a subcontractor for the United States government, making $11 an hour. He was homeless, working for the United States government. And they raised that issue, and suddenly in Seattle, Washington, people heard it. $15 an hour in Seattle, and it goes to California and San Francisco, New York, and so forth. That is the way change comes about. When you have an idea that makes sense and you have people prepared to fight for that idea, that's when change occurs. And I'm very happy to tell you, and this is a manifestation of how things change, is I have introduced a few months ago a $15 an hour minimum wage bill. It now has 31 co-sponsors in the United States Senate. So when we talk about the economy, what we say is, if you're working 40 hours a week, you don't live in poverty. Minimum wage becomes a living wage. Then we say something else. We say that there is something absurd that in the year 2017, women are making 79 cents on the dollar compared to men. And that is why we believe in equal pay for equal work. And then we talk about the need in the economy to create decent paying jobs. Well, how are you going to do that? Anyone who drives the streets or the roads of this country or goes over bridges that are in massive disrepair, or understands what goes on in the water system in Flint, Michigan, and many other water systems around this country, anyone who's been to an airport recently understands that our infrastructure in the United States of America, the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, our infrastructure is crumbling. $1 trillion investment creates 15 million good-paying jobs, rebuilding that infrastructure, and that's what we should do. And again, change takes place from the grassroots on up. 3 years ago, I introduced the idea of $1 trillion investment, and people say, oh, Bernie, that's crazy, that's too much, can't do it. That was 3 years ago. Today, there's widespread agreement, even among the Trump people, that we need $1 trillion to rebuild our infrastructure. And then when you talk about the economy, and you're on the economy, what everybody in this room knows is that the good-paying jobs out there require a significant amount of education. By and large, a high school degree no longer, with some exceptions, will get you a job into the middle class. And that is why I believe that in a highly competitive global economy, we must make public colleges and universities tuition-free. How many people here tonight are dealing with student debt? Well, there you go. Well, welcome to the crowd. There are millions of people dealing with student debt, which is now, I believe, over $1 trillion. A very simple principle, one that is not made very often, must be that we should not punish people for getting the education they need and our country needs. And that is why we have got to significantly lower student debt. Now, people say, well, Bernie, you know, you're just a nice guy and you're giving away all of these free things. You want public colleges, universities, tuition free. You want to lower student debt. How are you going to pay for it? It's an expensive proposition, and it is. It's about $700 billion over a 10-year period. I will tell you how. The time is now to impose a tax on Wall Street speculation. Nine years ago, Wall Street's greed and recklessness and illegal behavior caused horrific misery to millions of Americans who lost their jobs, they lost their homes, and they lost their life savings. The middle class of this country and the working people of this country bailed out, against my vote, Wall Street. Now it is Wall Street's time to help the middle class of this country. And when we talk about the economy, and when we talk about human rights, we've got to raise another issue that for many, many years was kind of pushed underneath the carpet. And I'm glad it's beginning to see the light of day. But left alone, the establishment won't talk about it. But it's a very simple proposition. Question, simplest question that I can ask, is health care a human right? It is. It is. It is, and we must end the disgrace of living in a country where thousands of people die every single year because they don't go to the doctor on time, because they have no insurance or they have high deductibles. We must end the disgrace in which if you are rich in America, you can get the best health care in the world, but if you're working class, you may not be able to get to the doctor when you should. And then on top of that, we have to understand that this is not a radical idea. You know, the establishment folks, the political pundits, oh, the radical idea, health care for all. Please understand that the United States of America is the only major industrialized country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people as a right. I live in Burlington, Vermont, 50 miles away from the Canadian border. They've had universal health care for 3 decades. British have it. Germans have it, Scandinavians have it, the French have it. If every major country on earth can guarantee health care as a right, every man, woman, and child in those countries, please don't tell me that we can't do that in the United States of America. And if you are a conservative business person, ask yourself the following question: how does it happen that our dysfunctional healthcare system ends up costing us almost twice as much per person as do the systems in Canada and in Europe? So our job is to create a universal, high-quality, cost-effective healthcare system, which is why within 2 weeks I will be introducing a Medicare for All single-payer program. want you all to think, and this is again thinking outside of the box a little bit. What does it mean to our lives to know that when you are sick, you can walk into a doctor's office without any deductibles, without any co-payments, and get the health care that you need? What does it mean to the people in this country and how we feel about ourselves and our anxieties and our stress when you know that if somebody in your family ends up in the hospital and the bill is $100,000, you're not going to go bankrupt because we have a publicly funded healthcare system. What does it mean if you are an employee right now who is on a job not because you enjoy that job, but because your employer provides decent health insurance? What does it mean when the American people become unleashed from employment that they don't want to be at because they will have health insurance as a right? So I think the time is long overdue that we as a nation had an economy and a government that represented all of us and not just the 1%. And I think that is not only the moral thing to do, I think that that is not only good economics, I think it is good politics. And what the Democratic Party has got to learn is that it will win elections when it has the guts to stand up to Wall Street, to the insurance companies, the drug companies, and the fossil fuel industry. So let me, in that regard, tell all of you what you already know, and that Donald Trump is out of his mind when he thinks in general, but specifically when he thinks that climate change is a hoax. Climate change is not a hoax. I'm a member of the U.S. Senate Energy Committee and the U.S. Senate Environmental Committee, and I have talked to scientists not only from throughout our country, but throughout the world. And what they tell us is that climate change today, as you all know, is already causing devastating problems in America and around the world, and those problems will only become more severe if we do not take on the fossil fuel industry and transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. And by the way, when you do that, you're going to create hundreds of thousands of good-paying jobs. And what the fossil fuel industry is doing today is exactly what the tobacco industry did 50 years ago. They are lying and lying and lying and putting their short-term profits ahead of the planet and the lives of our children and our grandchildren. When we talk about where we are as a nation, what Donald Trump and his friends are about is, for very cheap political reasons, trying to divide us up based on the color of our skin, our religion, the country where we came from, or our sexual orientation. That is what demagogues always do. They go out to people who are hurting and they say, you know why you're making $9 an hour? It's because of some Mexican in California who's picking strawberries, that's why. And you know why your public schools are inadequate? It's because of somebody who is a Muslim or somebody who is gay. Our political job is to stand up to that demagoguery and to come together as a nation, black and white and Latino, Asian American, Native American, straight and gay, men and women, native-born Americans, people who have immigrated to this country. Our job is not to allow Trump and his political allies to divide us up. Because when we stand together, and focus on the real problems facing our country, there's nothing that we cannot accomplish. And that means, among other things, especially in this moment, we have got to stand with the 11 million undocumented people in this country. And we have to fight for comprehensive immigration reform and a path toward citizenship. There are some 800, 900,000 young people in our country who are today in the DACA program, people raised in the United States who know the United States as their home. We must not allow Trump to end the DACA program. Today in America, there are over 2 million Americans, disproportionately African American, Latino, Native Americans, who are rotting away in jail cells throughout this country. Our job is not to build more jails and have more incarceration. Our job is to deal with youth unemployment and make sure that every kid in this country who wants to has a job and a decent education. Now, I know that turning on the TV and reading the papers nowadays can become a very depressing exercise and a frightening exercise. But I want to tell you from the bottom of my heart, as somebody who has had the privilege to run for president, somebody who has visited 47 states, 48 states in this country. We didn't make it to Alaska or to Hawaii. And I have talked to well over 1 million people in meetings like this and in larger meetings. And what I want to tell you from the bottom of my heart, forget what you see on television, the vast majority of the American people are decent people who want good things for their children and good things for our environment and our planet. And I can remember, and never will forget, being in the fields, the agricultural areas in California, 6, 7 o'clock in the evening, and seeing thousands of young people, black and white and Latino, standing together in the fight for an economy that works for all of us. And I saw that all over this country. I was recently in Trump country in Ohio, Southern Ohio, good people who want decent jobs and are scared to death of the heroin and opioid crisis. And you go to Detroit, an African-American city, same thing. People want good jobs for their kids. So it seems to me that what we have to do is really not all that complicated. Number one, we cannot allow demagogues to divide us up. Number two, we need a progressive agenda that speaks to the needs of the working families of this country. And number three, we need to make a commitment to this country in a way that perhaps we have never done it before. I think, and I don't mean to be overly rhetorical here, but my dad came to this country at the age of 17 from Poland, and he escaped just terrible, terrible poverty and anti-Semitism and everything else. Came to this country, never made any money. We lived in a 3.5-room rent-controlled apartment in a foreign country called Brooklyn. You guys know where Brooklyn is. All right. So he never made any money, but he was the proudest American that there could be, because he saw this country giving him the opportunity to raise 2 sons that would have been impossible from where he came from. We should be proud to be Americans. We have got to stand up to those people who want to destroy everything that is great in this nation. We have got to bring our people together and have the courage to take on the greed of people whose greed has become a sickness, unquenchable. People who want more and more and more until they have it all, prepared to step on everybody in order to get another $1 billion. It's not easy. The struggle is not easy. They have the money, they have the power, they have the media. But I believe from the bottom of my heart, and it's not just me what I believe, it's what history tells us, is that when people stand up and fight back, there is nothing that we cannot accomplish. Thank you all very much.